We are now very happy to welcome back to the show the governor of Maryland, Republican Larry Hogan. He is out with a new book called Still Standing: Surviving Cancer, Riots, a Global Pandemic, and the Toxic Politics That Divide America. And he joins us by phone now. Governor, thank you for calling in.
Well, thank you, Guy. Thanks for having me.
I mean, my gosh, that is one whale of a subtitle: Surviving Cancer, Riots, a Global Pandemic, and, oh, by the way, politics. You are, in many ways, and we talked about this the first time you were on the show, an unlikely governor in your state. You were not expected to win. Then you had this monster upset in your first election. You were very popular, won re-election, running away, and you have had to deal with some really major struggles in your personal life with the cancer diagnosis, some very disturbing riots in Baltimore, and now this ongoing plague of coronavirus. As you navigate these choppy waters on all of these fronts, are there certain principles that drive the way that you approach them?
Well, that's why I took the time to write this book, Guy. I mean, I won this kind of overwhelming upset in 2014, and I talk a little bit about how we were able to accomplish that. And right after becoming governor, dealt with the worst violence in our largest city in 47 years, and then 60 days after that, had this more personal battle with life-threatening cancer, and now we're dealing with this global pandemic and the economic crisis that's hit every state in the country, and we're all faced with. I guess I just thought some of those experiences. I think I've learned a lot more about my leadership, and I've learned more through the tough times than I did through the good times.
Sure.
And I just try to share some of that in the book about leadership and how to make tough decisions when faced with difficult odds, and how to overcome adversity, and I hope that people will find the book interesting.
So maybe give us one example of the type of decision that you had to make and how you went about making it.
Well, I guess right after I was elected, it's a big parallel to what's going on in some of our cities today. We had our largest city on fire, and I had to quickly make a decision. The city police and the city government of Baltimore were completely overwhelmed, and the city was on fire. 400 businesses were burned and looted and destroyed in the first couple of hours, and I made a decision within a couple of hours to declare a state of emergency, to send in an additional 1,000 police officers and 4,000 members of the National Guard to keep the people of that city safe, and to stop the violence and the looting and the burning and the destruction of property. That was a decision that I had to make quickly. Couldn't worry about the politics, and I had to be very careful not to overreact and further inflame the situation, but to make sure that we stopped the destruction and the violence immediately, which we did the very first day, rather than letting it continue to fester and grow over weeks or months on end, which we're seeing in some of our cities.
Meanwhile, let's fast forward to the current moment and this pandemic, and there's been an uptick in your state of hospitalizations in recent days, although I see there was a down day finally, which is welcome news. Talk about the status quo right now in Maryland when it comes to COVID-19. How are you feeling about the way the state is handling it right now? And I have a follow-up, but let's just talk big picture first.
Well, so we're concerned and looking very carefully at the numbers. We hit our peak about 96 days ago in all of those categories, and we were faced with the crisis a lot earlier here in the Northeast.
Right.
Some of the southern states are flaring up, but our case numbers are up because we're testing a whole lot more than we used to, but our positivity rate is low and continuing to slightly decline. We have a slight uptick in hospitalizations, which we're looking at, but still well within range. We also increased our surge capacity. We built about 6,000 additional hospital beds during the peak, so we're nowhere near concerned and not facing the problems that other states are. So we're trending in the right direction in most things, but I guess cautiously watching a few of these concerning numbers and staying on top of it with our task force of smart public health doctors and staying in constant communication to watch any potential upticks. We're concerned particularly about younger people. We have really dropping pretty dramatically numbers dropping among people over 35, but increasing slightly among those under 35. And so we're trying to look at those types of behaviors and where people are contracting the virus with robust testing and contact tracing and trying to get to the root of it, because frankly, we're very concerned that this thing has a way of, even if you think you have it under control, it really has a tendency to be able to spike up pretty rapidly.
Which brings me to the next question, which has to do with schools and the fall. And this is a really, really tough call in a lot of ways. It's hugely consequential for families, for parents, for the well-being of kids, for their academic development, right, for the economy and people being able to go back to work if they have kids at home. And there are so many elements to the decision around schools. And there are some conflicting data points. It looks overall like kids, a lot of studies suggest they aren't really strong vectors at all for the disease, and they are largely unaffected by it. But there are a few counterpoints to that as well. You have already laid out some of the guidelines for the state of Maryland. If you could talk about those and how you reached the conclusion that you did, and how you're going to evaluate and continue to reevaluate it as we get closer and closer to the school year starting.
Yeah, so, we've all had to make some incredibly difficult decisions throughout this entire crisis, many of them. This is probably one of the most perplexing because it's so critically important for all the reasons you just mentioned. Everybody, I think, just about everybody, would love to see us get our kids back in school as soon as we can, but we all want to go about it in as safe a way as possible. And so it's really not something we want to rush into. We don't want to make the wrong decision. But we don't want to keep our kids out of school. They wouldn't have them fall behind. You really can't. Distance learning and learning online does not replace that interaction with kids in the classroom.
Right.
And so we're trying our best to err on the side of getting kids back in classrooms if we can do it safely, while listening to CDC guidance on distancing and sanitation and keeping kids safe. That's easier to do in certain places than others. So our plan, which takes into account all the recommendations from the CDC, which I thought were really good, we put a plan together about a month ago. We were seeking the input of all of our local, state, county boards of education, and allowed them to submit plans for us to review. We're setting guidelines on the state and minimums and things they must meet. Things, if we reach a certain point that runs along with our overall plan of spikes or outbreaks, that we kind of put checks on and shut it down. But some of our more urban, more populous jurisdictions are going to, I think, move in the direction of more online learning, and some of our more rural areas are going to try to work towards getting kids back in the classroom. So it looks like it's going to be some kind of a hybrid when we start the school year, and then we'll just wait and continue to watch the numbers and see how safely we can do it. But it's very difficult because parents need to get back in the workplace, and we got to get the kids back in the classroom, but we're also concerned. You're right, they're not as impacted and don't nearly get as sick as older kids do. Actually, our biggest problem right now is people in their 20s and 30s. But they do spread the disease, and so we're worried about the teachers, and worried about the kids bringing it home to their parents and grandparents, and even if the kids aren't getting that sick. But our big issue right now, it used to be nursing homes and people in their 70s and 80s. That's no longer really an
younger
issue.
People. Yep.
It's now 20s and 30s are about a little over 50% of all of our cases, and many of our hospitalizations, which is really surprising people.
Governor, very briefly, Governor Hogan, in your new book, Still Standing, you a few times refer to John Kasich, the former Republican governor of Ohio. He has come out and he's going to endorse Joe Biden for president, reportedly at the DNC. You wrote in your father's name for president last time. Your reaction to Governor Kasich, we have about 30 seconds, endorsing the Democratic presumptive nominee.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake. It's not something I would do. But he's a former governor with a mind of his own, and I respect John Kasich, and that's his decision to make.
Governor Larry Hogan, Republican of Maryland. His new book is Still Standing: Surviving Cancer, Riots, a Global Pandemic, and the Toxic Politics That Divide America. Governor, good luck with the book. Thank you so much for your time on the show today.
Thank you, guys.